Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And I'm so glad you've joined me tonight for another fabulous story. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. The woman was likely in her late 60s, early 70s. It was hard to tell, as guessing someone's age was not as straightforward as it may seem. But with her shock of white hair that was skillfully layered in a flattering short-cropped hairstyle, you could say the hair colour itself was a giveaway as to her approximate age. It was attractive on her noble-looking refined face. It was clear she was one of those handsome women that improved with age, like a well-matured wine, that is at its very best once it has mellowed, so that any appreciative wine drinker that knows his stuff can easily detect the underlying subtle fruity and woody notes that a layman might not be so quick to discern. The woman had something unique about her demeanour that made you give her a second glance. She exuded a warm, congenial energy that lit up the entire room like a cosy, crackling fire on a cold winter's day, although in this case with soaring, unforgivable dry temperatures that had ruthlessly battered and devoured the entire countryside. With a furious, merciless heat, the woman's unexpected, serendipitous appearance was like a refreshing rain shower on a scorchingly hot day. She had a pleasing presence about her that got your attention, rather like an interesting book at the library that you're curious to read. The skin on her face was peachy, as if she had not been exposed to too much sun over the years. Either that, or she'd taken remarkably good care of herself by wearing a sun hat at all times. Her fair porcelain complexion was smooth, but the area around the contours of her chin and jowl area was slightly on the saggy side, as you would expect at her time of life. Her lively blue eyes were feathered by fine lines and wrinkles that made her all the more endearing. It was strange that this older woman, who no one had ever seen before, had entered the bar and was not remotely self-conscious. She had boldly swept past the male patrons with an effortless ease, not remotely concerned about the attention she had obviously aroused, if indeed she was aware of it at all. You'd think she'd feel self-conscious being the only woman in the bar like this, but the thought had not even trespassed across her mind, or troubled her thoughts in the slightest. You could tell at once this self-assured, assertive woman was definitely not from around these parts. Her clothing also appeared to stand out, as being different as to what the local woman would ultimately wear, whose sensible, robust clothes complemented their outdoor lifestyle most favourably. This woman was elegantly attired, wearing flared white cotton trousers with flattering bootleg bottoms and a blue and white very smart striped top. Let's just say wearing white during a Wyoming summer was not exactly the best idea, if you were an outdoor type, that is. The colour would not likely stay white for terribly long, and you would know this very well if you were a local resident here. Frolicking with white, by any manner of means, was not sensible in weather like this, when the country was as dry and parched as an old leather boot. It was a late Thursday afternoon, teetering towards the early evening. A few men were liberally scattered around the bar, like a plethora of tired autumn leaves. They were heartily enjoying beers after a hard day's work, and engaged in some light banter among themselves. Many were discussing the cruel summer weather, and how heartlessly it had affected the countryside, robbing it of all its intrinsic beauty, so that the scorched grass looked as if someone had thrown a bucket of bleach all over it, almost as if it had been through too many cycles in the washing machine, and was faded, dull, and tired-looking. Not that this was terribly unusual for Wyoming, that was well known for its dry weather. And as for the livestock, they were suffering from the unrelentless heat, many being attacked by far too many blowflies that were becoming a major problem for the locals, who were beating away the flies like a swarm of locusts. Some of the ranchers were devising schemes to eliminate them as efficiently as they possibly could, as flies were flying into open orifices like ears and eyes and bothering the animals, so that all the horses were wearing nets over their heads to keep out these tenacious intruders. One farmer was buying sticky sheets, which he wrapped around a large bin, and claimed there wasn't a space on the sticky sheets left where there wasn't a fly stuck to it, as so huge had the problem become. He claimed he steadfastly repeated the process 3 to 4 times a day. But getting rid of these nasty little critters was a huge relief to the horses and steers. As to why there were no women around in the bar, it was probably not the right time of the day to attract the fairer of the sexes. All eyes turned to look at the older woman, who had entered the bar as if suddenly a cool gust of fresh air had blown into the premises, offering a refreshing coolness to the late afternoon. Everyone looked decidedly frazzled. Men who had been laboriously labouring outdoors since the early hours of the morning looked fatigued, as if all their energy had been expunged by the blistering temperatures that knew no mercy. It would seem tired hair hung loosely around their faces in curtains of sweaty, grimy dirt, and their skins were covered with the residues of dust, dirt, and even oil. The countryside was begging for rain. Ostensibly all were relieved to be basking in the shaded, cool ambience of the bar, to gain light refreshment, with icy cold beers in hands that were quick to soothe away the blemished bruises and aches of the day, like a calming antiseptic lotion or a long relaxing indulgent soak in the bath. At one end of the bar 2 men were happily playing darts together and laughing a great deal, and at the other end there were 4 men who were playing a game of quarters. By all accounts no one had ever seen this woman before, in this quaint, rather charming small town in Wyoming. But news travelled fast around here, especially if there was a new arrival in town, that always demanded the curiosity of the locals. This stranger stood out from among them. The woman was so obviously different from people around here, and the fact that she was mature in her years deepened the inquisitive inquiries among the patrons, all lightly thinking the very same thing. Who was she? The woman moved with a certain amount of grace towards the exquisite handcrafted oakwood bar, as if drawn towards it by an invisible thread. She didn't look like the type who made a habit of drowning her sorrows in alcohol. She couldn't wait to plant her tired derriere on the comfortable-looking bar stool and lift her exhausted feet off the ground, as the weather had drained her of all her energy, and she felt like an old beaten-down car that had run out of gas and was beginning to stall and rattle as it warily chugged along the road, looking as if it was about to come to a permanent standstill. Of course the woman had experienced vindictively spiteful weather like this before, but no one ever got used to boiling temperatures like this, that were brutal to say the very least. The young, handsomely turned-out barman, standing behind the bar, was casually dressed in a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt, with the logo Buzzard's Honey, with a phone number at the bottom of the label, along with a Wyoming address. The barman was known to the locals as Chancer, and he was a good-looking lad. He worked tirelessly with his father running the family efficient mechanic shop, but liked to take on a few shifts at the bar regularly, as a way of earning spare change. Well, that's the excuse he told his father, who made no sense of it, as he earned good money working for him. The truth was that Chance's father would never comprehend that his son genuinely enjoyed socializing and interacting with the people, and working behind the bar enabled him to get to know the locals better than most. Chancer tried not to look too curious about the strange woman who had taken a seat behind the bar. It didn't do to make strangers in their small town feel like a fish in a goldfish bowl. The first thought that engaged Chancer's inquisitive mind was that he had never ever seen this woman before a day in his life, and there was something about her that made him instinctively guess that she wasn't American. But how he assumed this, he wasn't entirely sure, as she hasn't even opened her mouth yet. It wasn't exactly like she was wearing a huge sign on her saying, "By the way, I'm not from around here," but it was clear to him that she was not. The woman noticed Chancer at once, as he stood behind the bar smiling warmly at her, while he casually buffed up some glasses, polishing them so superbly with a cloth, so that in the late afternoon sunshine that filtered into the bar from one corner window, it made the glasses twinkle with a reflectant light, so that prisms of rainbow colours danced around the bar. The woman who was now seated on the bar stool, not too far away from Jesse Farmington, who was a well-known rancher in these parts. He was wearing his large velvety black cowboy hat, and had the rugged, handsome looks of a cowboy whose skin had been weather-beaten by the sun from years, months, and days spent riding on the back of his horse and diligently attending to the needs of his steers. He was a man who clearly loved the outdoor lifestyle, for his demeanour was satisfied but relaxed, like someone who thoroughly enjoyed his life. Jesse ran his own ranch, without a foreman. He was in his early 70s and was as fit as a fiddle, with a full head of grey hair that frolicked in flattering curls around his face. He was always clean-shaven, and smelt of the earth intermingled with an Old Spice aftershave. He looked not a day over 60, although the telltale fine feathering of lands around his eyes probably betrayed his true age. He was sitting at the bar contentedly, nursing a beer in his hands, his mind empty of any thoughts, when the woman promptly sat down, not too far away from him, and was close enough that she could have reached out to touch him if she had so wished. The woman took great pleasure in embracing the coolness of the friendly bar, with its light-hearted leisurely ambience, as if basking under the shade of a large umbrella. Walking into the bar from the outside had literally been like walking from a sauna into a cool refrigerator. It had been so hot and unpleasant out of doors, and the last time the woman had experienced heat like this was on a trip to Singapore 5 years back. The woman had begun to privately wonder if coming to this remote country town had been a good idea after all. What on earth had induced her to come out here? Many might have thought she had lost leave of her senses, and she probably had. She realized that many of the people in the bar were stealing her curious glances, but she was too fatigued to really care about that. As far as she was concerned, they could stare as much as they liked. She needed a drink to cool down, and that's all she cared about. She thought a shot of rum might just relax her withered state. She casually plonked her purse on the smooth wooden surface of the bar, and looked up at Chancer with a warm, engaging smile, intermingled with an expression of expectation on her face, as if she was surreptitiously asking him for a drink, without actually articulating the words. But Chancer immediately got the message, as he was quick on the uptake of serving the woman with his usual charm. "Howdy, ma'am. What can I get you to drink?" "I'd love a rum and coke," she said, in a crisp English accent, which took Chancer aback, as it confirmed his suspicion that this woman was not American, and he couldn't help wondering what she was doing in their small town, where visitors were few and far between, especially strangers like herself. The woman could feel the eyes of the rancher sitting a couple of bar stools away, suddenly looking at her rather curiously, after she had spoken, but when she turned around to acknowledge his presence, as would be the polite thing to do, he hurriedly looked away. It was clear he was a quiet, unassuming man, but he was definitely listening to her light-hearted conversation with Chancer. If anyone knew what was going on in the small town, Chancer Florentine, who was 25 years of age, knew the ins and outs of people's lives, as well as he knew what he'd had for breakfast that morning. As working behind a bar, you couldn't help but hear things and gather knowledge like a squirrel with its acorns for the winter. Suffice to say, people's inhibitions magically melted away like ice on a hot day, when alcohol was involved. Chancer's mother felt it was greatly inappropriate for her son to know the secrets of people's lives, but she wouldn't be complaining when he told her about the stranger in town who'd popped into the bar in the late afternoon to order a rum and coke, who was not from this part of the world by any manner of means. "Ma'am, if you will forgive me for saying so, but you're not from around here. You've got an English accent. What are you doing in our small Wyoming town, if I may be so bold to ask you? We don't normally get exotic visitors like yourself in these parts, so you're a breath of fresh air to us. I'm sure you've noticed all the gawking looks you've been getting from some of the folk drinking here this afternoon. I apologize for that on their behalf. We're not very good at disguising our interest in strangers that pass through our neck of the woods, especially those like yourself that are from foreign waters. But believe it or not, we are friendly folk around here, and welcome newcomers gladly. So I'd like to welcome you to America, ma'am, and to our unassuming small town." "Thank you for that, young man. How very kind of you. Exotic, I hardly think so. I wouldn't describe myself as that, but it's kind of you to say so, young man," said the woman, shrugging her shoulders and letting out a musical laugh. "If you must know, I'm from a small little village in Derbyshire in England. And as to why I'm visiting your small town, I'm looking for an old friend of mine, who moved here to this town an awfully long time ago, I believe. She moved to America 54 years ago, would you believe it? I lost touch with her. We were at school together in England. She was phenomenal at sport. I was the antithesis of that, I'm afraid. While she won every sports game, I was dreadful at sports back in the day. I was always the last to be picked for any team, which was dreadfully embarrassing for me. And yet, despite being so opposite in every regard, we became the very best of friends. Inseparable we were in junior high, you know. We started writing to each other about 20 years ago, and we reconnected again. She was living in these parts at that time, and then life, you know, it got awfully busy for the both of us, I suspect, and we lost touch like you do. I'm on vacation here in America, and I wanted to visit all the hip places I've heard about, like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco. I've always been told that you haven't lived unless you visited those cities, so I thought I needed to tick them off my bucket list of things you must do before you die, sort of thing. As I was in America, I thought I'd look up my old friend, but I'm not sure if she even lives in these parts anymore. I thought I'd ask around. I came here on the off chance that we might reconnect again after all these long years. She's definitely not the type to use social media platforms, I'm afraid. We're not from the savvy generation that knows how to do that kind of thing. Even my grandchildren can do things on their cell phones that are beyond my grasp. I come from a generation that doesn't do things like that. We like the old-fashioned ways to do things. So the last address I had for her was somewhere in this town, as she married a rancher and moved here. I hope I'm not grasping at straws, but I couldn't return to England before making a last-ditch effort to try and find her, even if I'm looking for a needle in a haystack, so to speak." "What's her name, ma'am? This friend of yours, I mean?" asked Chancer politely. "I know most of the locals in these parts pretty well, I have to say," he said, sliding a glass of rum and coke towards the woman, which she took gratefully. The glass tinkled with its ice swirling around in the dark concoction, and the woman delighted in the coldness of the drink and the cooling refreshment it offered. "Ah, that is so good," she said, taking a sip. "Oh, it's so hot out there today. Your bar is so delightfully cool, let me tell you. You're very young, young man," said the woman, studying Chancer curiously. "You must be in your 20s, I suspect. You're unlikely to know my friend. She's not from your generation. She'd be my age, about 70. Her name was Flora Ranches. Yes, that was her married name, I believe. I know she lived in this town. Have you ever heard of her before?" Chancer looked uncomfortable at the mention of Flora Ranches' name. His face flushed as pink as a peony. He hated to be the bearer of bad tidings. "I'm very sorry to have to tell you, ma'am. Flora Ranches died about 5 years ago, from thyroid cancer. She was well loved around here, and a respected member of the community. And yes, I knew her well. In truth, I had no idea she was initially from England. She had no trace of a British accent. Must have lost that a long time ago, I suspect. She was a devoted rancher's wife, but her husband Randy sold his ranch,
moved to Colorado after her death to be with close family members. Let's just say he couldn't function without her, so he's now running the old family ranch back in Colorado with his brother Warren. It seems you had a wasted trip coming out here. But if it helps, I do know Flora's body is buried at the old cemetery here. She loved the small town, you know, with all her heart, so she wanted to be buried here. You could pay her a visit at the cemetery. I'm so sorry for your loss, ma'am, and that you came all this way to be met with such bad news."
"Oh, heavens, don't be sorry," said the woman, taking a tissue from her purse and dabbing her eyes. "Of course it's sad she's dead, but I knew there was always a risk she might not be around any more, as both her parents died of cancer very young. So her family has a genetic disposition to the big C, as I call it. Growing up, she used to tell me she'd never reach her 80s. She was adamant about that, you know. When you get to your 70s, some people don't stay around. Others go on to their 90s and beyond. It was a risk I knew I was taking coming here," she said, remaining stoic on hearing the news about her friend's passing.
"As I said, ma'am,"
said Chancer, genuinely sympathetic to the woman's plight, as she had come all this way to this town for nothing,
"I'm really sorry."
"Well, it is what it is, isn't it? I think I'll pay my respects to her and visit the cemetery while I'm here," said the woman reflectively. "I mean, I've come all this way. It's the least I can do in the circumstances to show her she's not forgotten. I think I'll put down some flowers for her at the gravesite and then be on my way. I should have visited America sooner, to see her again. Unfortunately, I left it far too long. I've only got myself to blame for that. I intended to visit America sooner, but intentions are just that, aren't they? Intentions. It's actions that matter. But before my husband died, I didn't have as much free time available. But now I'm on my own. I have all the time in the world, but now she's gone. Isn't that so ironic?"
"I'm very sorry about that, ma'am, that you were out of luck in reuniting with Flora Ranchez. If it makes you feel better, ma'am, she didn't have a long drawn-out illness. She was one of the lucky ones. Died a week after she was diagnosed with cancer, which is unusual. Maybe not knowing she had cancer meant she didn't believe she was ill. And you know what they say, illness can be psychosomatic. So when a doctor says you're ill, suddenly you're going to feel pretty lousy. And in my experience can go downhill fast after that. Fortunately, there was none of that for Flora Ranchez. She refused to see doctors. That was the way she was. When she visited a doctor, it was late in the day. She was complaining of feeling slightly out of sorts. So her husband Randy dragged her to the surgery while she kicked and screamed like a reluctant kid. I suspect she regretted going after receiving her bleak diagnosis. She didn't go through chemo and all that stuff. She was one of those lucky people. She had an aggressive cancer, I believe. When she discovered she had it really bad, it was too late in the day for her to do anything about it. It had metastasized throughout her entire body. She never had the struggles you usually hear about when people have cancer. She went to sleep, never woke up. One of the best ways to go, if you ask me. Even her husband Randy said she died peacefully in her sleep. Sometimes all that medical intervention prolongs the agony.
"Well, I'm glad to hear she didn't suffer, and her end was quick," said the woman. "Still, I'm sad I missed her. I really am. I was so excited about reconnecting with her again. I lost her address but remembered her hometown, which is why I came directly here, because I know in small towns people know each other. I very nearly didn't come, but I couldn't go back home without attempting to find her. I wouldn't have forgiven myself for that. I knew if I asked around, I'd find the answer, and I have."
"I'm sorry it's a tombstone in a cemetery that you will be visiting, ma'am. I really am. Would you like another rum and coke?"
"That would be lovely," said the woman. "It's thirsty work, you know, receiving bad news, and that grim hot weather out there doesn't help in the matter, let me tell you."
"We are having a heat wave of note," said Chancer, "and it's not pretty. All the animals are suffering."
"And the humans, I suspect," said the woman, taking another sip of her drink. "I've experienced heat waves in England, but this one is pretty tough going, let me tell you." Chancer returned to wiping his glasses as the woman nursed her drink, rattling around the ice in her glass, feeling slightly melancholic about not being able to reunite with Flora Ranches after all these years. Some things were clearly not meant to be. She probably shouldn't have come out to this remote country town after all, on a nostalgic whim like this. And who's to say Flora would have wanted to see her anyway? They'd been out of touch for long enough, and Flora had lightly moved on with her life in the way you do. But she'd always been her very best friend. And when she'd moved to America all those years ago, it had been tough to lose Flora. But life had marched on in the way it did at the speed of light, and the woman found it hard to believe that she was now in her 70s. Where had the time actually got to? It didn't feel that long ago, when she was in junior high eating cheese and tomato ketchup sandwiches on the playground with Flora.
"It's on me," said the quiet rancher, whose soft southern drawl broke the silence.
He was sitting 2 stools away from the woman. He was waving to Chancer and pointing to the woman's rum and coke.
"Get her another one, will you, Chancer? When she's finished with that one. Put all her drinks on my tab, will you? The lady's had a nasty shock by the sounds of things." "Will do so, Jessie. Very good of you, sir," said Chancer, giving him an appreciative nod.
"Oh, that's so very kind of you," said the woman, turning around to thank Jessie. And for a moment her blue eyes met his silvery ones, and there was a flash of electricity between the two of them that the woman had not expected to experience at her time of life. I mean, she wasn't a teenager, for goodness sake. Some might describe her as an old mare ready for the knacker's yard, but she wasn't done yet. She had a whole lot of life yet to be lived still. The rancher cleared his throat.
"The name is Jessie Farmington. I'm 72 years old. I have my own ranch not far from here. I'm widowed. My wife died 5 years ago from cancer, like your friend Flora. I must express my deep commiserations for your losing your friend like this. My wife did not die of thyroid cancer. It was breast cancer in my wife's case. I'm going to be blunt here, and not beat around the bush. I'm far too old for that. I'm looking for a wife, and if you're interested, you will do very nicely. It gets lonely at the ranch without a woman by my side. Do you think you might be interested in being a rancher's wife? Or is that wild idea completely off limits to you?" he asked.
The woman was slightly taken aback by the handsome cowboy and his brazen honesty. She didn't quite know how to react to this. If he was going to engage in any light-hearted banter with her, she had not expected this. She could tell the rancher was shy by nature, polite and reserved, and for a moment she wondered if she had imagined his words. But it was clear she had not. The rancher was waiting for her to reply. He was drawing in a deep breath, almost as if expecting to receive the brush-off. "My name is Missy Colchester," she giggled. "I'm 70 years old, turning 71 on the 29th of April next year. I'm a Taurus. I currently live in Derbyshire in England, in a rented cottage after I sold the family home, which was far too large for a single woman like myself. I'm also widowed. My husband died 3 years ago, very suddenly from a heart attack. I miss him dreadfully, so I really do understand loneliness. And I'm not sure if I'm looking for a husband. But as you put it like you do, I wouldn't say I'm not interested. I'm warming to the idea. But in truth, I've never lived on a ranch before, so I'm not certain if such a lifestyle would actually suit me or not. But I do love horses, I love nature, and I do like cows. In your case, I suspect steers is what they are. But they're much of a muchness to me, I'm most sure. So I wouldn't say that I'm not interested. Besides, Mr. Farmington, you're an incredibly handsome man, if I may be so bold to say.
and I'm rather flattered by your proposal and interest in me, as it's not every day that a lady of my advancing age gets propositioned like this by a debonair, handsome cowboy like yourself. So yes, you've thrown me off my perch. But I quite like the feeling of being airborne and having my feathers all flustered. It's a thrilling feeling. I feel like a teenager all over again, shaken up I do. And I never expected this when I came to the bar this afternoon." The rancher looked at her with a twinkle in his eyes. He was amused and chuckled. "You're a lovely lady, ma'am, with a good sense of humour, and I like that. I like that a lot. I'm going to be straight with you, ma'am. You won't know if you like living on a ranch until you've experienced it. So you need to stay on one first. Why don't you stay on my ranch in a spare room and see if it floats your boat? You can get to know me better. And if you like me and the ranch together, we can fly over to Vegas and make it official. Get married. What do you say?" "Are you being serious, Mr. Farmington?" asked the woman, studying him closely, as if looking for any signs that the man was teasing her. The rancher, who'd removed his black cowboy hat from his head by now, was twisting it playfully in his hand, and was looking at her earnestly. "Of course I'm being serious, ma'am. The name's Jessie, by the way. I never play games. What you see with me is what you get. I'm an all-or-nothing sort of guy. I'm Sagittarius. I believe it's a fire sign, and there are no half measures with me. We know what we want, and we go for it. Dare I say my late wife was also Taurus like you are. Born on the 10th of May, she was. There is something about you that rather reminds me about her, although I'm not sure it has anything to do with the star sign. But maybe it does. Who knows?" He paused for a brief moment and continued, "You said yourself, ma'am, you were passing through Wyoming. In the morning you will be gone. I think you're lovely. I love the way you speak and the way you carry and conduct yourself. I can always tell good stock and breeding when I see it, from my steers to my horses, and even my dogs, and I'm never ever wrong. If I let you go, I would be a foolish man indeed. I remember once going to an auction. I missed buying the most superb horse I've ever seen in my entire life. She was a beauty, she was. I took too long to put my hand up. Someone else got there first, and the auctioneer had closed the sale before I had a chance to protest and to put down my bid. I could have kicked myself for being so slack on the uptake. I always regretted that late decision, and made my mind up from thenceforth that I would never ever be slow on the uptake again. So that's why I've proposed to you right now. I can't let a good thing like yourself slip through my fingers like butter. That would be a bad idea." "So let me get this right, Jessie. Are you looking at me like one of your livestock?" said Missy teasingly, raising a questionable eyebrow. "No, of course I'm not, ma'am. What I'm saying is I know a good thing when I see it, and I'm not going to let it pass me by. I'm in my 70s now. I refuse to look a gift horse in the mouth. May I call you Missy?" "But of course you can call me Missy. It would be rather odd, don't you think, if you called me by my last name, if you were intent on marrying me?" she teased. "And I am intent on marrying you, Missy. I think you and I would be good together. So how about it? We can pick up your stuff from where you were staying. You can cancel your flights back to England and move in with me. If it doesn't work out, I'll buy you a ticket back to the UK myself. Can't say fairer than that, can I? I'm a gentleman, so we can take things at your pace, very slowly if need be. What I'm really looking for is a companion, a close female friend. It gets terribly lonely back at my ranch, returning home to an empty ranch. I miss the fact that everything is soulless and empty, without the presence of a woman around." "I'm staying at a B&B around here," said Missy, looking bemused. "You want me to move in with you right away? Is that what you're saying? Are you sure about this? Isn't this a little bit fast?" "Of course it's fast. I wouldn't run an efficient ranch if I didn't make my mind up quickly about things. The moment you sat next to me in the bar and ordered your rum and coke, I knew I liked you at once, and my instincts have never failed me yet. That is why I'm good at what I do. I run one of the most successful ranches in these parts, and I say that without wishing to appear immodest. It is what it is." "He speaks the truth, ma'am. He's not blowing his trumpet," said Chancer, stepping forward and interceding in the conversation rather abruptly. "Jesse here, I've known him all my life. He owns one of the finest ranches in these parts, and a more honourable man you can't find. If you marry him, ma'am, you're a lucky lady indeed. He'll treat you fine. His late wife was very happy, loved the bones of Jesse, she did. I know I'm sounding like a dating app, and I don't mean to, but I think you two would be good together. The rancher meets the English rose," he teased. "I think it will work out fine." "So go on, say it. You're getting hitched," he said, pointing a finger from Missy to Jessie, unable to disguise the enthusiasm on his face. Maybe he was a romantic after all, yet he tirelessly teased his own mother for her obsession with romantic fiction. "That's right, the two of us are getting married shortly," said Jessie, with such conviction and self-assurance in his voice that even Missy was thrown by his presumptuousness. She incongruously found it rather attractive. Indeed, Jessie was so assured that they were getting married that she started to believe it herself. She had always loved men who knew what they wanted from life. So there we are. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.